piece I'm playing in the background is Erik Satie's Gymnopedie No. 1. If you have studied piano, you've probably heard it before. It's typically assigned to intermediate students, and it's also featured in the soundtracks of several movies and TV series. It's probably Satie's most well-known work. Erik Satie was a French composer born in 1866. Satie was an interesting guy, to say the least. He never married, lived in a single tiny room for most of his life, wore the same velvet suit every single day, and kept a very strict daily schedule, which included eating only foods that were white. In terms of his music, Satie never really considered himself a composer. He went to music school, actually the famous Paris Conservatory, but he hated it there. His piano teacher, Émile Decombe, called him the laziest student in the conservatory, and he was actually expelled because of his unsatisfactory performance. Then he joined the military a few years later, but he didn't like that either, so he purposely caught bronchitis so he would be too sick to serve. Then he moved back to Paris, and at the age of 22, he wrote his now famous Gymnopedie. Satie was one of the pioneers of what we would now call background music, but he called furniture music. Music that you're not really supposed to pay close attention to, but it's just there in the background. It's atmospheric and somewhat repetitive. It's present, but not the centerpiece. Furniture music is actually the precursor to minimalist music, associated with composers such as Steve Reich or Philip Glass. Satie's Gymnopedie, however, is not considered furniture music, although it has had far-reaching impact. One person influenced by his work was the Japanese composer Nobuo Uematsu. Uematsu was born in 1959 and never had a formal music education. He started teaching himself piano when he was 11 or 12, and he ended up majoring in English in college. He was working in a music rental shop when he was approached by someone from a company who asked if he wanted to write some music for some games. So he said yes. This company was Square Enix, and Uematsu ended up scoring many games with them, including the franchise for which he is most known, Final Fantasy. Today we'll be looking at one of Uematsu's pieces titled Into the Darkness from the Final Fantasy IV piano collection. As we will see, this piece and Satie's Gymnopedie No. 1 are uncannily similar. Let's just take a look at the first few measures. They both have bass note, chord, bass note, chord. Pretty similar, right? And these chords are somewhat complex. So let's put on our old-fashioned 17th century music theory hats and do some analysis. For the Gymnopedie, what key is it in? Well, 2 sharps means D major, right? But the first chord is G major 7. Major 7 chords don't really happen that often in classical music. So let's take off our 17th century hat and put on our 20th century one. So we have G major and D major, and they just repeat. But if we were to analyze it, are we playing tonic dominant, 1-5-1-5, or are we doing subdominant tonic, 4-1-4-1? Even once the melody comes in, it doesn't really help us because the chords just keep repeating. It's ambiguous where the tonal center is. Now let's take a look at Into the Darkness. What key is it in? 4 flats, so F minor. What's the first chord? Well, we already have a D natural, which is outside our key signature. So maybe this chord is a D half diminished chord in first inversion. Or maybe it's a F minor 6 chord. Okay, what about the second chord? Well, having E and E flat in the same chord is definitely strange. The bottom 3 notes, C, E, B flat, make up a C7 chord, C dominant 7, just missing the 5. But what about this E flat? Actually, if we rewrite it as D sharp, then it's immediately clear. D sharp is the sharp 9. So this chord is C dominant 7 sharp 9, which is a very common chord in jazz. So if we ignore all these embellishments, then these chords are just a minor 1 and then 5 7. It's just tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. So even though these chords have more accidentals and seem more fancy, the underlying harmony is actually more classical compared to the Gymnopedie. Now, I'm not going to bore you with more in-depth analysis, but I'll mention one more high-level similarity between these two pieces, which is structure. Both pieces are written in ternary form with 3 different sections. There's an A section, followed by a B section with slightly different material. Then the A section comes back with some minor changes at the end. It's a very common structure, and when you're listening to this piece, or to any piece, try to notice when the main melody comes back. Notice if it's in a different key, maybe a different register, or if it's different in any way. These are clues that can tell you where you are in the piece and where it's going to go next, or maybe if it's about to end. So before I play through this piece, if you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, please like and subscribe. Thanks! Now, here's Into the Darkness by Nobuo Uematsu.